muddy. So really, this is key as you're starting this process to make sure that you can be specific and have that consistent message. So as we're talking about skills, that can mean different things to different people. So I just wanted to give a little bit of context for how we're going to be talking about this today. So there are different types of skills. So those could be technical skills, like you know how to use SPSS software for analyzing data, you know how to use specific types of equipment, you have language skills, if you have interpersonal skills for being able to work with people, transferable skills, etc. So when I talk about transferable skills, those are going to be skills that are applicable across settings. So these are going to be useful to you in lots of situations. So these could be things like organizational skills, leadership skills, communication, right? So whether that's part-time job, full-time job, your coursework, you can develop those skills in a lot of ways, and they're going to serve you well whatever content area that you're focused on. So as you're kind of going through this process and preparing yourself, you want to make sure that you're thinking about those transferable skills that you have, that you can talk about, that you've been developing, you're continuing to develop, as well as those more specific skills like language fluency or technical skills that would be relevant to you in your career. So as you're developing all of these application materials, you want to focus on what experiences are going to be relevant to employers. So sometimes people get caught up in this idea that they can only talk about paid experiences, like paid experiences are the only ones that matter. And that's not true. Employers do value other types of experiences, like, you know, if you've been involved in student organizations, you volunteered in the community, you've done projects, whether that's for a course or just a personal project. You know, maybe you just were working on GitHub and did some programming assistance with someone else's project. If you've ever done any research, if you're on athletic teams. So, you know, they want to get this comprehensive sense of who you are and what your skills are. So you could draw from any of these experiences as you're thinking about your skills and sharing those on your resume, interviewing, etc. So, you know, kind of have a sense of what you feel like is going to be most relevant, because sometimes that might be your work experience. And sometimes, you know, maybe you've had some retail experience, but that doesn't have anything to do with you wanting to be a graphic designer, but you have a leadership position in a graphic design club. So that maybe is more important for them. So, you know, think about what's going to be most relevant for you to focus on. Oops. So as you're looking at positions, you always want to analyze a job description. So think about what are the skills that they're explicitly asking for. You know, those are often going to be in that requirements, qualification sections, as well as the responsibilities. So what are those key things that keep coming up and what they're asking for in a potential employee? So always, it's a great idea to save those job postings. You know, if you can do that in the system you're applying through, save it as a PDF on your computer, because oftentimes those postings will disappear after the date has passed. And then you can also research the employer. So that might be looking at their company page on LinkedIn to see what are they posting about, what seems to be important to them. It might be their mission on their website, if they have, you know, an annual report that they share, newspaper articles, physically or online. So, you know, find out what's important to them as an employer and what you should focus on. So this is just kind of an example for a position at Webster. So as you're looking at this posting, you know, think about what patterns there are. So with this one, we can see, okay, they're mentioning Excel more than once. So that clearly is something they care about, something that you want to focus on. You know, oral and written communication skills, attention to detail, statistical knowledge, analysis. So clearly you want to think about, okay, talking about your experience with Excel, data, attention to detail, communication skills would all be good to focus on in your resume and cover letter. And you can do this in different ways. So that might be in a skills section listing that you have proficiency with Microsoft Excel. It might be in a project section. You talk about a project you did for a course where you analyzed a lot of data using Excel. It might be a bullet point for a position you had. So maybe you developed a spreadsheet to help keep track of inventory for your store that you worked at. So, you know, make sure that you're getting across those skills, but that can be through different ways. And we'll talk about how that can also kind of look in these different types of documents. But this is just to give you a little bit of an idea about how to focus in on those patterns. So thinking specifically about your resume, there's a lot of ways to customize your resume based on what skills you want to focus on. So I'll talk about most of these in a little bit more depth. So summary of qualifications and objective are always optional. They don't have to be included, but sometimes they can be a really nice way of emphasizing particular skill sets. You can always customize your headers. So you can have more general headers like work experience, professional experience, but you can make them more specific. So maybe you want to break down your experiences into a customer service section where you talk about, you know, working at Target, working at Starbucks, and then you could have a section that's, you know, graphic design experience, and you talk about your internship with an advertising company where you worked on graphic design projects. So you can always customize those headers to best fit what experiences you have. And that's just an extra clue for them about those skills that you have. You also want to think about the order of the information on your resume. So, you know, for instance, in that last example, you probably want your graphic design experience to be above those other experiences that are good for employers to know, but are maybe a little bit less relevant. So that's also something that you always want to think about in terms of order. Experiences included, we already talked about this a little bit, but thinking about what's going to be most important for them to know. And then as you're adding bullet points and detailing those experiences, making sure that you're doing that in a really specific way. So we'll kind of talk about each of these a little bit more. Oops. So like I mentioned, it's always optional, but what an objective is something that is going to get across what's your goal. So this is generally like a statement, kind of, you know, sentence or two length, not more than 3 lines. And you want to focus on what are those skills that are most important, your education, your goals, as well as kind of focusing on the situation. So that could be career areas, like maybe you want to work in real estate. It could be a specific position title, like real estate agent. It could be a type of organization. So you really want to work in an advertising agency. You want to work at a university. Could be functional area. So, you know, kind of a broader department, as it were. So, you know, you want to work in finance, but that could certainly be at a lot of different types of companies. Or it could be that you want to work with a population. So, you know, maybe you specifically want to work with elementary school students versus high school students. So an objective might sound something like, you know, position as a physical education teacher, where you can use your knowledge in, you know, athletics and healthy living to help students develop solid health and wellness skills. So that's something where, you know, it's brief, to the point, but it gives a little bit more information about what your goal is. So an objective could be helpful in a situation like a career fair, where you are talking to recruiters who are looking for multiple types of positions. So you want to make sure it's clear, are you looking for an internship? Are you looking for a full-time job, etc. It could also be helpful to have an objective if maybe it's not really clear based on your experiences. So maybe you're a newer student, you don't have a lot of experience, so it's not going to be immediately obvious what you would be looking for. So that could be another situation where an objective might be a good use of space for you. Similar to an objective, a summary statement is a little bit more fleshed out version of that. So you still want to get across, kind of what your goal is, but provide a little bit more background about who you are and those important talking points. And so this is usually best if you have more experience. So maybe you've been working for 5 to 10 years, you're coming back to do a graduate degree here, and you can use a couple of descriptive bullet points to think about, do you have any certifications that set you apart? Are there specific experience? So you want to say, I have 10 plus years of experience in public accounting. What are your career accomplishments, strengths that you want to focus on? So again, those like key skills that you want to make sure are really obvious upfront to an employer as they're looking at your resume. And this can also be a situation where if you're a career changer, you can kind of tie together those experiences. So, maybe you worked in education and now you're going to school to become a counselor. So definitely there's a lot of transferable skills there where you're thinking about your connections with other people, how you are using those interpersonal skills. So maybe you want to kind of tie together those themes for them. Whoops. So another really important part of your resume are your bullet points. So for each experience that you're listing, you want to have descriptions because these are going to help provide context for readers. So, this could just be a line, 2 lines per point, and you want to think about what accomplishments you have. So, not just saying, okay, well, I did X, I did Y, but thinking about those key questions. So what did you do? How did you do it? And why did it matter? So maybe you had a position tutoring students. So, what did you do? Were you tutoring high school students? Were you tutoring elementary school students? That's definitely, a different level of knowledge there. How did you do it? Were you working one-on-one with students? Were you working in small groups? Was this once a week? Was this every day? And why did it matter? Did you help students to improve their reading comprehension skills? Were you working with them on multiple subject areas? Thinking about what was the point of what you were doing, because that's really going to set you apart from other people who just say they tutored students. It gives me a little bit of information, but it's not going to be as specific as saying you tutored high school students once a week to focus on, algebra skills. You also always want to start with a strong action verb. So those are going to be those specific verbs like tutored, created, managed, instead of kind of more passive verbs like worked, helped, assisted. There's nothing wrong with those verbs, but they just are not really going to paint as clear of a picture. So you want to focus on using strong language. And definitely, like I mentioned, add quantifiers where you can. So if that was, you took inventory twice a week, you improved the number of Facebook followers by 50%, adding in that information is really helpful when you do have that. So here are some examples of what your bullet points might look like. So on the left side, we have kind of some of those average ones. So you publicized events. Okay, so what could be a way to make that better? You created social media posts and flyers to increase attendance at weekly trivia events. So you're really getting across that point of what did you do specifically to publicize events, right? So you can use the chat box, but does anyone have any ideas for how to make those other points more specific? So like I mentioned, you could think about numbers. So, you know, how much money did you raise? How many goods were you able to have for donations? So again, thinking about just starting with that action verb, adding in quantifiers where you're able to. Or same thing for that next bullet point. So what age level were you working with? 8 to 12-year-olds. What was the focus? So you were teaching drawing skills with an emphasis on building composition skills. So that's going to be much more specific, give employers more information to work with. But you'll notice that these points are not super long. You know, I'm not writing paragraphs here. You're still keeping it concise, but giving them enough detail. And then as you're thinking about transferable skills, like I mentioned, you might have a skills section, and those you want to be really focused on tangible skills. So those are things like, you know, software programs, language fluency, the transferable skills like communication skills, leadership skills. That is really going to be better if you're incorporating that through your experiences and your bullet points than just listing them. So like if I saw this on a resume, you know, somebody listed they had leadership skills, communication skills, that's great. But that doesn't really tell me a whole lot because those are very broad skill sets. So what does that actually look like for them? So if you're using those and incorporating them in your bullet points, so, you know, in your part-time job at Target, you're saying you organized and tracked inventory to ensure effective use of space and timely reordering of items. So, okay, that's telling me how do you use your organizational skills. Or for leadership skills, you led a team of 15 on a service project. You know, how did you communicate with folks? Was that through presenting? Was that through social media? What does that look like? So hopefully this gives you a few ideas for how to incorporate those transferable skills, but doing it in a specific way by using those in your descriptions for your volunteer experience, your work experience, etc., rather than just listing them. So these are some of our sample resumes. You can find these on our website. And your resume does not have to look exactly like either of these, but I just wanted to have these as an example. So on the left, we have Nia. And so you can see that she's an educational studies major and she has a skills section. So at the bottom, you can see she focused on some of those technical skills like Adobe Spark, Excel, her Spanish skills. She's Red Cross first aid and CPR certified. And then for her experience, you know, even though she doesn't really have paid work experience, she still was able to talk about all of her community involvement, so her volunteering positions, and still giving specific descriptions of those experiences. So you can tell that she's really focused on giving back to her community. You know, she's done tutoring work. She's worked with children also through some of her other experiences. So that's something that she cares about. And then on the right side, we have Hazel's resume. So she's somebody with more work experience, you know, she's going for her master's degree. And you can see she has her certification as a senior professional in human resources. You know, she has definitely more detailed bullet points to think about what are those skills she's had, what are those similar work experiences that would be relevant as she's looking for other HR roles. And you can see that she has a summary there. So thinking about what were those key skills that she wanted other people to know. So she has 5 years of experience in benefits and compensation. That's something that she's knowledgeable about and could use in another position. So now I want to take a couple of minutes and thinking about what I just talked about, write a strong bullet point about a meaningful experience that you've had, or if you have a resume already, you know, pick one of those points and think about how to make it stronger. So I'll give you a couple minutes, and then if you'd like to share, you can type it into the chat. Yeah.
Carrie, do you mind kind of taking a question midway or? Okay, so I think this is something that a lot of students ask about, which is if I've never had experience, like especially maybe like a first year student, work experience or volunteer experience, what might you include here in a bullet point?
Yeah, so you could think about like course projects that you've done. So, you know, maybe you've had to do a research project. So you needed to analyze data, or you had to come up with kind of a mock marketing plan for a company in one of your marketing classes. So definitely doesn't have to be, you know, work experience, volunteer experience. So think about a class that you've had, you know, and think about what would be something relevant from that class you wanted to share. That could be a good strategy. You could also think about other experiences. So maybe you were on, you know, a mock debate team in high school. So even though it's not from college, you could talk about any involvement that you had. So if you had a leadership position, or maybe you just, you know, were a member, and that's okay, but you helped to raise money for a charity. You know, did you have any experiences like that in high school previous times, whether that was, you know, maybe like a National Honor Society, anything along those lines could be definitely good information for employers to know. And then, you know, also just thinking about kind of skills or coursework. Those are also sections that you can include on your resume. So especially if you're earlier, you haven't had as much experience, but you want to show like, hey, I've taken coursework in, you know, these different areas. You've taken principles of finance or introduction to accounting. That would be helpful for them to know. You can always kind of build your resume out with those academic experiences, if that makes sense. Okay, so hopefully you've all had a little bit of time to kind of think about it, write a bullet point. So I would love if anybody felt comfortable sharing. You could just type that into the chat. Let Rebecca know if you want to share.
Okay, Carrie, we have one that is conducted English classes to 11 to 15-year-olds, instructed the methods and techniques in achieving positive results in final exams.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, so definitely, using those life experiences that you had. So even if that wasn't through a job, but something where you were able to tutor other students, things that you did in your free time, that's great. So definitely an example of, you've specified how old those students you were working with and what was the point. So helping them achieve positive results on their final exams. Great. Okay, so we'll kind of move on to our next section now. If I can move my slides. So now we're going to focus on cover letters. So cover letters should really complement your resume. So you always want to tailor a cover letter for each position that you're applying for. And so you want to think about how you can connect your experiences and skills to the positions. Oops. Okay, well, let me go back. Okay. And you also want to make sure and express your interest. So, maybe you're applying to marketing internships, but, why are you applying at Edward Jones versus applying to a nonprofit that's looking for a marketing intern, right? So why are you specifically interested in that role or that organization? And then you also want to show the employer what you could do for them. Because I think especially when you're kind of early on in your career, sometimes you think about, okay, this would be a great experience for me. I could really develop more of my skills, gain some more experience about marketing. But thinking about, for an employer, they want to know, what are you going to bring to the table? So thinking about how can you show what skills you have to them. So thinking about the structure of a cover letters are always going to be one page, except for really specific circumstances. So in that first paragraph, you always want to think about, who are you? So what are you majoring in? What have you been up to? Why are you interested in this position? So maybe you did an internship at this company, so you really love the experience to work there full time. Maybe you volunteered at a nonprofit organization, and so you really connect to their mission, and that's why you want to work there as an intern. So that is that kind of initial getting that reader's interest to focus on, who are you, why are you interested in? The middle paragraphs, so this could be one paragraph, this could be a couple of short paragraphs, but this is really where you're focusing in on your experience. So how do your experiences connect to that position? So looking at the job description, looking at those responsibilities that they list. So what experience do you have that's similar to that, or something that you've done previously? So those, again, could be from work experience, they could be from volunteer experience, your coursework projects that you want to share, but just some way to talk about your strongest skills and qualifications, because that is really, again, going to help them understand how you could fit into that position. So you want to avoid just generalities Same thing like we talked about before by saying, okay, you know, I have experience with working with data. Like, okay, but tell me more. So you have worked on a research project, you've used Excel or SPSS software to analyze data. You know, how did you do that? So same thing as writing in your resume, you want to specifically talk about those most relevant examples and experiences. And then in your final paragraph, this is really just that wrap up. So you want to thank the reader for their time. You know, thanks so much for considering me for this position. And then you might have an action step. So, you know, you might want to say that you're going to call in 2 weeks to make sure all of your application materials were received. You might set up a time to talk to them in a career fair. So maybe you've applied to a position they have on Handshake, but you're still going to talk to a recruiter at a career fair. So you want to mention that. And then your contact information and how they can best reach you. So that's really all that is. Very short, to the point. So now I'm going to show you what a real example of a cover letter could look like. So this is a position for a human resources generalist. So in their job posting, they were looking with somebody for a bachelor's degree and ideally a master's degree in human resources. They wanted somebody who had some previous experience in HR with, you know, exposure to recruiting, employee relations, benefits management, a specific certification, you know, familiarity with payroll systems, Microsoft Word, Excel, and then somebody that supported their values as an institution. So I know that's a lot of information, but that's kind of general ideas of what they were looking for. So then this would be a pretty traditional cover letter format. So you have your information at the top, the date, and then the contact information for the employer. And then as you can see, it's in this letter format, stick to a page. But so in that first paragraph, Hazel talks about what role she's applying for, you know, that she's on track to complete her Master of Arts in Human Resources because that's qualification they're looking for, and that she also has relevant certification, and, you know, that she is interested in working in higher education. And then in these middle sections, she gives some examples. So, you know, she talks about creating a community wellness program. She talks about supporting the benefits management. So thinking about, you know, what were those relevant past experiences and sharing those examples that fit with what the employer is looking for. So as you can see, you know, she's able to add in some quantifiers. So she performed more than 30 employee orientations. You know, she helped individual employees with their benefits questions. And then she kind of talks about how her skills and strengths-based perspective could fit in to that position at St. Louis College of Pharmacy. So again, we have cover letter examples on our website if you want to see some others, but this is just an idea for how you can expand on what you already shared on your resume and add in more of those specific examples. So as you can see in that example cover letter, she addressed it to a particular contact. So on the job posting, it had Daniel Bauer. So she addressed it to him. So you really, if you can find that information, you want to address it to somebody specific. So avoid to whom it may concern, dear sir / madam. You know, that's just kind of more of an outdated phrasing. So if you aren't able to find a specific contact, you could do something like, you know, dear hiring manager, address it to that department. So, you know, like dear finance department, talk about your interest in that position. So, try to make it as specific as possible. And then, like I have already talked about, you really want to describe those specific examples and qualifications, because a cover letter gives you more space than your resume to do that. So you can expand more than just having that line or two bullet point. And then you want to make sure that readers are interested. So if you're starting every single sentence with I and say, I tutored children at this nonprofit, I led weekly tutoring sessions, it gets very repetitive and it's not as interesting to read. So make sure you're using those transitions, you're using sentence structures, so you can say things like, as a tutor, I did XYZ, so making sure that it's just an interesting document to read. You always want to proofread. So if you need help with that, you can always contact the Writing Center, get their perspective on it. We're always happy to look over cover letters as well. And, just don't talk yourself out of the job. So sometimes students will say things like, well, I only have experience with this, but I'd love to learn more. So they can see your resume, they know what experience you have and don't have. So don't talk yourself out of anything. Just be to the point and say what you do have. So focus on the positives, don't focus on the negatives or experience that you don't have. Because everybody is, in college, you're a new professional looking for a new level of advancement in your career. So there's going to be plenty of other people in the same boat. So you don't want to provide anything negative that's going to make them pause and think more about your application. Okay. So hopefully that gave you some more information about cover letters. So now I want to take a few minutes and think about your LinkedIn profile. So this is, kind of a screenshot of an example profile. And the first thing that you always want to do is to customize your URL. So on this one, you can see his LinkedIn profile just has his name. So like my profile is just like linkedin.com/in/Carrie Lee. And that's going to make it really easy for employers to find you, because if you don't customize, it's going to be a whole random string of letters and numbers. And so that's really hard to type it on your resume, to share. So make sure that you have that customized. And then you also want to use that headline space to think about what your goals are. So for instance, this person had econ major and aspiring financial analyst. So that tells me, what he's majoring in, what he's looking for. So, it could be something like, human resources professional. It could be your most current position. So if you're already working in a role, you could think about, human resources major. Whatever makes the most sense to you, you just want to have that specific headline that's going to tell somebody at a glance who you are, what you're looking for. And I would avoid really long, complicated headlines, because if they're not on your page, that's going to get cut off. So, if you're sharing your information or contributing to a group discussion, they're just going to see those first 3 words of like creating opportunities for, and then you miss the rest of the sentence where it talks about that you work with human resources or sales or whatever that might be. So a space where you can add more information is that summary. So in this example here, he talks about being an economics major, what he's really interested in, that he's taken microeconomics coursework, he's had an internship. So thinking about, again, what are those most important things you want an employer to know about you? Because that's going to be that first section they're looking at. So you can use either first or third person, whatever you feel like is more natural. So either using that I or using third person, like, David is a senior at Berkeley, etc. It's really up to you. And then in your profile, you want to add those experience and descriptions. So you can just take them straight from your resume, copy and paste. And again, don't feel limited by the LinkedIn headers. So those could be course projects that you're sharing. Those could be work experiences, those could be volunteer experiences, just anything that you think would be helpful for an employer to know about you. And then you can add skills and endorsements. So as you're thinking about, what skills are going to be most important for employers to know, you can include those. So sometimes LinkedIn will kind of suggest skills to you based on what experiences or information you put in, and other ones you might want to add. So maybe it sees you're a finance major, so it suggested finance. But you also want to make sure that data models is something that you have experience with. You want employers to know that. So you can really customize, add as many skills as you feel like are relevant. And then you can have connections endorse them. So those might be a supervisor at your work, or if you've had an internship, they could endorse that you have skills in those areas, or peers in your classes that you know. And then this is a pretty new feature, I think, but LinkedIn has also added in these skill quizzes. So for a lot of like common software programs, so you can answer some questions, do some quizzes, and then it will kind of endorse that you have this basic level of knowledge in that. So that's also just something else to explore if those are relevant for you. But it's just another way for you to show what skills you have. And it's also a way for employers to search for you. So a lot of recruiters do go through LinkedIn. And so if they're looking for somebody with specific skill sets, specific experiences, they can search for you. And so you might pop up if you are using those specific keywords and skills that they're looking for. And you can also really use LinkedIn as a portfolio. So you can add in work samples or projects that you've done. So as you can see for this person, they're creative director, so they've included some examples of their advertising projects. So those could be a presentation that you shared for a class. It could be something you did as part of an internship. It could be a flyer that you created for your student organization you're involved with. The sky is really the limit, but it's just another way for employers to see some more information about, what does that look like in action? What did you produce? What's your kind of aesthetic like if you're in a more creative profession? So the only thing that you just want to make sure that you're aware of is if your employers, so if you're posting work from an internship or from a job, just make sure that you're aware of their policies, because you don't want to accidentally share some proprietary information and then you get in trouble. So, if you have questions about that, you can always ask your supervisor if that's okay to share on LinkedIn. But course projects, things like that, if you've already finished that, they've been graded for the course, then that's certainly something you could include. And another aspect is the recommendations feature. So recommendations could be from a mentor, colleagues at a role you've had, your supervisors. And so this is another way that you can really focus on skills. So if you're saying, you have experience with finance, you're a finance major, and then you have a recommendation from a past supervisor talking about your experience as a finance intern and these projects that you worked on, that's just going to emphasize those skills even more, right? It's going to add more credence to that. So you can always ask others to share those. These are generally pretty short. It's not going to be a page-long recommendation letter that you might have if you were applying to graduate school. This is going to be short, like maybe paragraph, 2 at most. And you always want to remember that networking is a two-way street. So, if you're asking others to recommend you, make sure it's somebody that you would feel comfortable recommending them. So if, maybe your supervisor wanted a recommendation and you could talk about your experience with them as a manager, so make sure that you're kind of willing to go both ways with that before you ask somebody. So that's just another way to really use LinkedIn and promote your skills in another way. And then you want to make sure that you're using LinkedIn to its fullest capacity. So you've already filled out your profile, you've added in your skills, maybe added a recommendation or two. Make sure you're doing something with that profile then. So follow companies or organizations that you're interested in, because they're always going to post opportunities typically on LinkedIn, as well as information about what their company's up to. So that can help you be more specific as you're writing about why you're interested in that company down the road. And as you connect with others, this is your professional network, but it doesn't mean that everyone has to be in the same area as you. So if you're, wanting to go into real estate, you can connect with folks, students that you worked on a project with in your finance class, supervisors, mentors that you've had, other, family, friends. So definitely as you expand your network, it's going to open the door to more second degree connections. So, make sure these are people that that you've talked to, but again, you never know what connections people have. So don't feel like you only have to be super specific. They only have to be exactly in your career area to be helpful. Because maybe, even if somebody who works at a company you're interested in, even if they're not in that department, they could still share a little bit about the company culture there. And that might be helpful for you to know about as you're thinking about applying somewhere. There's lots of groups on LinkedIn. So some of these are connected to professional organizations. They might be closed groups only available to members, and other ones are just more general. So it might be like graphic designers on LinkedIn. So definitely, engage in those, because that's a good way to keep up with trends in your industry, see what articles people are sharing. As you're contributing, asking good questions or sharing your experience, that's just another way for people to see you. And so with that, I would also consider making your profile public. So there's a lot of different settings that you can control of how much information you want other people to see. But, if you're going to list your LinkedIn on your resume, you're going to use that, then you want to make sure if other people are searching you, they can actually see information on your profile, right? So keep that in mind as you're adding to your profile and thinking about how you're using that on LinkedIn. Okay, so now we've talked a lot. Want to kind of talk about structure for a typical interview. So with interviews, you always want to have that kind of initial time for greeting. So kind of welcome, they'll introduce the people in the room. So you might have a one-on-one interview, or it might be a panel with several different representatives from that department, your potential manager, a human resources rep. So there might be some kind of initial chit chat at the beginning, asking you about how's your day been or how's the drive been. So kind of that surface level, polite conversation. And then the opening questions, those are going to be more broad typically. So they're going to ask things like, tell me about yourself. Why are you interested in this position? And then they'll kind of go on from there to those more specific questions that are usually more content focused. So they might ask you, do you have experience with creating different charts or graphs in Excel? Because that's going to be something that the intern does a lot. They might talk about, do you have past experience working in HR? Tell me about your experience with benefits administration. So those are going to be those more specific ones that they focus on. And then they're always going to leave some time for you to ask them questions. And so this is something you always want to prepare in advance. Have some questions in the back of your mind to ask about whatever it is that you care most about. So maybe there's a part of the job description you're really interested in. You want to know some more about that. Maybe you want to know more about the kind of career backgrounds of your interviewers or their experience working at the company. So just having some information prepped in advance, and then that final closure, whether that's shaking hands in person or saying goodbye on Zoom, whatever that kind of closing looks like. So, you know, you've gotten through this process, you've written your resume, you've written your cover letter, so you've already thought about your skills, shared that information with employers. So now you want to think about, how do you highlight your skills in the interview in a little bit different format? So employers can see your resume. You know, you definitely can share information that's already on your resume, but thinking about, you know, how did you develop those skills? Adding more detail and more context about those relevant experiences that you want to share. So I mentioned at the beginning, I always try to save those job postings that I apply to, and then you can go back to them. So when you're prepping for an interview, you can say, okay, you know, they're looking for these qualifications, so I really want to make sure and mention the certification I'm working on. Or, you know, this other responsibility, I've done something really similar to that before, so I want to make sure and talk about that. So you don't need to memorize things. You know, nobody wants to kind of hear just like a robotic memorization of a story you have, but just thinking about, what are those examples and stories from your past experiences that would be relevant to share for? Because chances are they're going to ask you something you didn't anticipate. You might get thrown off a little bit. That's okay. But the more that you've thought about these experiences or relevant examples, the less likely you are to be caught off guard, right? So definitely we would always suggest kind of jotting down some notes, practicing with your career advisor, how to answer interview questions, practicing with a friend or another professional. So whatever that looks like to you, but just make sure that you are preparing, because you know your skills best, but interviewing is really a skill. So for those introductory questions where they're asking you, you know, tell me about yourself, or in a career fair, you walk up to an employer booth, you introduce yourself. So this is where you want to use that elevator pitch. So it's generally pretty brief, you know, should be 30 seconds, less than a minute, and just a message about who you are, so your academic and professional self. So when they ask you, tell me about yourself, they don't necessarily want to know that you have 3 cats or you love tap dancing. You know, they want to know what's relevant to them, right? So that you're an accounting major, that you've had an internship, that you're really involved in your community, whatever that might be. And so it just kind of helps direct the conversation, gives them some information to start from. So in an elevator pitch, there's sort of 3 components that you always want to include. So you want to think about, who are you? So this could be, you know, your major, something you're doing right now, your name, and then what you do. So that could be something that you're doing right now. So a current student job that you have, an internship, volunteer experience, or it could be things that you've done in the past that you think would be relevant for them to know. And then where you're going. So what's your goal? You know, are you looking for an internship for summer 2021? Are you looking for a full-time opportunity in teaching? What is your goal? So as you can see, this would just kind of be an example of what this would sound like. So if I'm going up, I'm introducing myself to someone, I might say something like, hello, my name is Ryan Gorlock, and I'm a junior computer science major at Webster University in St. Louis. Outside of my studies, I work at the Information Technology Help Desk at Webster. Using my communication skills and IT knowledge, I assist faculty, staff, and students with a range of technical issues. I'm looking ahead to summer 2020 IT internship opportunities where I can apply and hone my technical skills to solve problems in a mission-driven environment. So again, you know, pretty brief, kind of a paragraph if you were writing it out, but now you know something about Ryan. So you know he's a computer science major, you know he's worked at the IT desk, you know that he's talked about his IT knowledge, his communication skills, and what he's looking for. So then an employer could start to ask more questions about, well, tell me more about your IT job, or tell me more about what type of internship opportunities you're thinking, or what courses he's had as part of his computer science program. So it's just, again, a really good way to introduce yourself, focus on what's important to you. And then as you get into those more specific interviewing questions, those questions are often going to be something called behavioral-based interview questions. So this is really based on this idea that the most accurate predictor of future performance is past performance in a similar situation. So, if I'm an employer and I'm thinking about, okay, this is a role where you have to interact with customers a lot. So what would happen if you had a customer who was really upset about their order? They were complaining, they wanted resolution for this issue. So if you're just asking like, well, how would you respond to that? That can give you a little bit of information, but it's going to be a lot more helpful to them if you can say, hey, at my job at Starbucks, I had a customer who's really upset because I didn't get their order right. We'd accidentally put whole milk instead of 2% milk, whatever that might be. And this is how I handle that problem, because that's more information about you've already done something similar. And so you would likely respond in a similar way in the future, right? So these behavioral-based questions are often focused on particular transferable skills. So they might sound something like, tell me about a time you showed leadership. Walk me through a time when you set a goal and the steps you took to achieve it. Give me an example of when you had to go above and beyond in order to get a task accomplished. Tell me about a time you faced a conflict while on a team, or a time where you had to find a creative solution to a problem. So you can kind of see those transferable skills they're getting at, like conflict resolution skills, creative thinking, goal setting, persistence. So anytime you're hearing those, like, tell me about a time, describe a situation, give me an example, that's a trigger for you to know, okay, I need to share an example. And that's really the best practice in general, is to give information and share a specific example of a time when you did something similar. So now that you know that, you've gotten these interview questions, how do you structure your response? So you've thought about the specific examples from your experience that relate to the question. You always want to be confident and positive. And it's okay, like if they ask you a question and you haven't had experience with that yet, that's okay. You're still early on in your career. You can talk about how you would potentially approach that situation. That's fine. But again, you always want to be positive. You don't want to say like, well, I haven't done anything like that before, and just leave it there. You can talk about, well, you're going to be taking a course in that next semester, so you hope to get more information about that. So being specific. And then you really want to use something called the STAR method. So I'm going to talk about that on the next slide, but that's a really great way to structure your response. And then you always want to make sure and end your statement strongly. So when you finish up, a good way to do that is kind of wrap up with a question. So if they ask you about your leadership skills, then you can give your example and then say, that's a time where I was able to show my leadership skills, and finish. Don't awkwardly trail off or just kind of stop talking, because, it's awkward for the employer because they don't know if you're actually done or you're just thinking. So make sure to end your statement strongly. And now I'm going to talk about what the STAR method actually is. So STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So it's an acronym of those 4 words. So the first step is situation. So you want to explain the context of the example and describe that situation. The task is the task that you were responsible for completing, or the solution that you developed. action is what you specifically did. So thinking about not just like, well, you know, here's what my team did, but what did you do specifically? And then what was the result? So, you know, what happened? Were you able to get the customer a replacement for that item that broke? You know, were you able to help the student in your classroom calm down, kind of refocus, be able to join in on the lesson again? What happened? And it's always best if you can find examples where there was a positive ending, you know, things went well. But even if something didn't go the way you expected, that's okay. But talk about what you would do in the future to have a more positive outcome and a lesson that you learned as a result of that situation. So here's an example of how that might sound if you were using the STAR method. So they ask about a situation that shows your excellent communication skills. So you could think about, okay, what's the situation? What's the time that I used my communication skills? So you were a communications chair for a nonprofit, Be Empowered. And so you had to communicate information and promote their annual 5K charity race. What was the task, or what was your goal in that situation? So as communications chair, you wanted attendance numbers to be higher at the charity race than it was the year before. And then what did you specifically do to make that happen? So you contacted local news outlets to share information, you promoted events on social media, you made posts about individuals who were positively impacted by the charity, you updated the event website. So those were the specific actions that you took. And then what was the result? So you were able to add more than 200 social media followers, you increased attendance by 150 more people, and a local newspaper and TV shared about your charity. So that's kind of a way to use that STAR method. So then when you put it all together, you're speaking normally like you would an interview. That might sound something like this. So in my role as communications chair for Be Empowered, I communicated information about the annual 5K charity race to raise money for local cancer survivor resource groups. We wanted to increase our attendance numbers from the previous year, so I developed a strategic communications plan. I contacted local news outlets as well as local charities and entities like universities and the public library system to feature our information. Additionally, I promoted the event on Facebook and Instagram and made posts on individuals impacted by the charity. I made timely events to the event website. As a result of my communications plan, more than 200 followers were added to our social media accounts. Registration was increased by 150 more attendees than the previous year. The event was highlighted in a local newspaper and local TV broadcast, which also generated additional donations for the charity. So, you know, you covered all of the bases there, right? So you gave the employer a really specific idea about how you used your communication skills and what the outcome was for that situation. So, you know, if you're answering all of your interview questions in that way, they're going to have way more information about you than if you're just saying like, oh, well, I was a communications chair for a nonprofit organization and I helped develop a plan for communicating and increasing attendance at our charity race. Like that's, you know, tells me something, but it's not as specific, right? So when you're answering these questions, you don't need to talk for 5 minutes. You know, you still want to think about being concise, you know, that kind of 1 to 3 minute time frame potentially. So it doesn't have to be every detail ever, but you want to give them enough where they can say, great, you know, they've done something similar. I can see how they would use their skills to be really great in this position that we have. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more sense of how you can talk about those skills. So next steps, you know, make sure that you're building out your LinkedIn profile. So using the things that we talked about, Maybe you want to add some more connections, add some examples of projects to your LinkedIn, customize your URL. Make sure that you update your resume so that's ready, because you never know when opportunities are going to come up. And so if you can keep your LinkedIn, keep your resume updated, you're not going to have to go through that panic of like, oh no, when was the last time I updated my resume? I haven't included this most recent experience on. So just, minimize stress in your life, make a point to add to those documents, and practice interviewing questions. So that could be, just looking at some questions online, thinking about those. It could be making an appointment with your career advisor to talk through, to get kind of another opinion on what you could do to enhance your interviewing skills. So, make sure that you're taking those next steps to really implement this information. And obviously, if you have questions, we're here to help, and we have some time for questions. So I will see if Rebecca, has any questions for me right now, or anything else that you want to ask.
Yeah, so Carrie will take your questions in just a second. So start thinking about those, add those to the chat, and I'll make sure that she responds to all of the questions that you have. As you're thinking of those questions, we actually like to check that we're providing the information to you that we said that we would. So I want to do a quick survey with you all, if you wouldn't mind. It's just a few questions, so I will launch that. And again, whatever questions you have for Carrie about expressing your skills through resume, cover letter, LinkedIn, interviewing, all of that, feel free to drop that into the chat box. So I'll give you about a minute or so to work through that survey as well. So Carrie, while people are completing the survey and thinking of their questions for you, you mentioned earlier on in our conversation about bullet points and making sure that you have enough detail and information in them. How do you know when to stop? Like, how do you know when you've gone too far, there's too much information there?
Yeah, absolutely. That can be a hard line to tell sometimes. So, what I would say is, if you can confidently say you've answered those 3 key questions. So you're thinking about, what did you do? How did you do it? What was the point? So if you've answered those 3 questions, you're great. You're good to go. What I would say is kind of that line of like too much information is, for a bullet point on like a normal resume, normal margins, 10 to 12 size font, if it's more than 2 lines, that's too much. Because resume is really just that initial information for employers, because in your cover letter and your resume, you can add more detail to that. And a resume is a way for them to say like, hey, it looks like you have some similar experiences, you have some great skills and qualifications. I want to talk to this person more in an interview. So you definitely don't have to include everything ever, because that's too much and employers are going to kind of check out. So if you're getting to that point where it's more than 2 lines, that's a really good indication that it's maybe too much information.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. All right, guys, what questions do you have? As we, I know some people are still working on the poll, so so a couple of questions came up during the course of our conversation about, our services, things like that. So students and recent graduates, people who've graduated within a year, can work individually with a career advisor on all of the topics that we talked about. So if you have individualized questions or concerns, or just kind of want to get a pulse check with your career advisor, that is definitely something that we would, be happy to have you do. In the email that I'll send tomorrow, it will have information about how to connect with someone to schedule an appointment. And then the other option that we talked about in the chat was our resume drop-off service. And so that is an opportunity for students who might not want to come in and do or virtually do face-to-face conversation, or who might have issues with time zones and making it a little bit difficult to get in touch with someone in person, to email a resume in and have a career advisor. Usually it's the one for your major, and to have that person review your resume, give you feedback via email, and then to be able to exchange information in that manner. So I provided the link for that in the chat. So you guys can take a look at that. And again, tons of information will be forthcoming in our email that I'll send out tomorrow. Again, that'll go to your Webster email address, or if that's not the email address associated with your Handshake account, it will go to your personal email. So not seeing any questions. I'll give you, another minute or so to type. Oh, here. Okay, we do have a question. So Dinara recently read that we should not include the information about our gender and age in our resume. Is that true?
That's a great question. So one thing I will say, just to be clear, so when I'm kind of talking about this information, I'm really kind of focused on US style resumes. So for a US style resume, you definitely don't want to include your age or gender on there. So with kind of different protections for employees, and employers want to make sure that they're not discriminating against individuals kind of for those key categories. So things like your age, your gender, your race or ethnicity. So you don't want to include that information. Sometimes they might infer that, like from your name. Rebecca is generally, name for a woman. So they might get that, but you don't need to say like, well, I'm female, here's my specific age. For some other countries, they have a little bit different requirements because those employee protections look a little bit different. So like, for instance, you would never include a photo of yourself on a US resume, but there are some countries where that is the norm. So if you are somewhere else like that, then I would definitely kind of check in with professionals in your country to make sure that you are providing the right information and things that employers want to see. So in general, I would say no, but if you are somewhere else, then I would look more information up for that, if that makes sense.
So Carrie, is it better to write a resume and search for work after your first year, especially if you don't have a lot of experience that you think an employer would be interested in? Yeah,
so definitely I would say for a lot of things, there's not any real right or wrong. So there's no one exact right path. What I would say is, I would start developing your resume now. So even if you're a first year student, start putting together a resume, because you can always just add to that same document. So even if you don't have work experience yet, you're not in a position where you're able to find something, that's okay. Start working on that now, because sometimes you might have something come up where you find out that there are some on-campus jobs hiring, because especially for our St. Louis location, those oftentimes tend to be kind of at semester. So at the start of the school year, they'll post positions. They might have positions at the end of the semester if they have students graduating, the beginning of the next one. So you never know when those opportunities might come up. So have those documents ready and then apply. So yeah, so if you're looking for internships, most first year students, probably that's not going to work out because there may be other applicants who have more experience, they're farther along in their program, so employers are more likely to hire them. But it doesn't mean that you can't apply to things, because you never know what that applicant pool looks like. So if something is interesting to you, you know, it's not requiring a certain year of experience, you know, it doesn't say only seniors apply, then you can apply if you're interested. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of a sense.
Yeah, thank you. So there was a question about resume drop off and how to do that. So I will send the link back through chat right now, and that takes you to a web page that outlines where to email your resume and what information you should include in that email to help your career advisor better give you feedback. One question we have is, do employers check profiles on social media?
They do. So definitely, mostly every survey that professional organizations, you know, different common business magazines have put out, most employers check. So I would say it's not typically the first thing. So, you know, if they have 100 applicants to this full-time job, they're not going to look at every single applicant's social media, because that's just a lot of time. But if they're saying like, okay, maybe here's these top 10 people, you know, we're interested in these folks, they often will Google you, you know, and see what comes up. So if that's something like your LinkedIn profile, maybe an interview you did with like a student newspaper, you know, your information on your work website, things like that, that's totally fine. But if there are things that are maybe not as positive, you know, negative information out there, that can sway their opinion. So yes, it is definitely something they look at. And especially if it's something where it's more of like a networking process. So if you've reached out to somebody to do an informational interview, find out more about what it's like to work in their industry, what their career path has been look like, you know, they're likely to check out, see, okay, do you have a LinkedIn profile? What information have you shared about yourself? So it's definitely advantageous for you to keep your LinkedIn, Handshake, other social media filled out. You know, if it's something like your Facebook, more personal accounts, then I would typically keep those private, because, you know, if it's not professional, that's not the focus of it, then you want to determine what employers are able to see. But there are sometimes folks where you have a business, and so you have a Facebook page, you have a Instagram page where you share your artwork because you're an art major. So, you know, just kind of depends on the purpose of those accounts, to what privacy settings you want to have set.
Other questions? Can experience being a YouTuber catch employers' attention?
Yeah, you know, definitely depends on what's relevant. So maybe you share reviews. So for, you know, your industry, that's something where you talk about your experience with different companies, review products, like that might be relevant to share. So if it is something like that, you could share that. So it might be something like including a link, same way you would with your LinkedIn profile. It could be having it as an experience. So maybe you kind of want to list that under like a project section, and you talk about you have a channel where you review games because you're a game design major, right? That seems relevant. If it's something where like, I really enjoy makeup, I have like a makeup YouTube channel and I'm going into finance, then I don't think that's bad information, but then I maybe wouldn't focus on that as much, because that might not be as relevant for them to know about. But it could be something you share, like if they're interviewing and they're asking about your communication skills, you can talk about, hey, you know, I have this YouTube channel with 10,000 subscribers and I'm able to communicate information in a clear way. I'm able to do this. So yeah, that definitely could be something that's relevant.
Yeah, I could definitely see that relating to a lot of areas, marketing, media production, any kind of communications, like some areas of business, like you said, and depending on the content, whether that's related to your field or not, in terms of what you're actually talking about on that YouTube channel. When is the career fair, Carrie?
It is October 6th, so get excited. It's 1 to 4, I believe. So you can sign up on Handshake and make sure that you sign up for specific sessions. So employers are continuing to add those, but they can either have 30-minute group sessions that are a little bit broader overview, you know, maybe their company, what positions they're going to be looking for. And then they have 10-minute individual sessions where it's one-on-one with you and a recruiter or representative from that company. So, you know, depending on what you're looking for, employers can set up either options. So make sure that you're signing up in advance so you get the links for those. Because if you don't sign up, then you won't get the links to share with those on Handshake.
So follow-up question, I'll address this. Where is the career fair? So this year it is actually in Handshake. So Handshake is our career management platform. You would have all used it to sign up for this event. So hopefully you're familiar with how to get into your account. But in our follow-up information, I'll also send you how to get in contact with the career fair. And how to register for that. So it is, so Handshake has created this video tool so you can go in and very similar to something like Zoom, you launch videos and chat or you know, engage with employers in this kind of manner, except you sign into Handshake and it's really pretty easy to use. But next week and the week after that, we'll be hosting some prep sessions for anyone who just wants to get ready for the career fair. So we're going to have one on September 22nd at noon. And then these are all Central Time. So September 22nd at noon, September 24th at 1, and then September 30th at 4 p.m. So again, all of those are in Central Time. And so those sessions will help you to figure out both the technical aspects of the career fair as well as best practices for how to navigate any career fair, and specifically this time a virtual one. I will provide the link to Handshake, just the general one. And then I've got to go grab this, but the link to the actual fair itself, I can give you guys a link to the preview page so you can find that once you're logged in. Got to sign back in Handshake, guys. I'll also put all of that in the email tomorrow. But the link that I just included, that's where you can sign up. If you're a current student, the first way to try signing in is with your Connections username and password. So that would be the first option. Handshake's being rude to me right now, not letting me sign in. Carrie, anything to add about career fair or any of the prep sessions that are coming up?
Yeah, so I would say if you're interested in coming to the fair, I would definitely check out the prep sessions just because it is going to be a little bit different this year, not in person. So just a new format. It should be hopefully pretty intuitive, but I would definitely check those sessions out. And similar to what we talked about today, you know, make sure that you're working on your resume. So if you need help with that, reaching out to your career advisor, you know, don't wait until the day before to say, oh no, I have this question, or I'm not sure how to add in this information. So definitely make sure that your information is up to date, that you have your Handshake profile up to date as well, your LinkedIn, if you have that. So, you know, make sure that you're taking these steps now so that you're ready for the fair. Or if you've never had an interview before, you're not sure what to talk about with a company representative at a fair, that's okay. Like, we can talk about that more one-on-one, practice those interviewing questions. So
great. So the last question that we're able to take today, because we're almost out of time, is it possible to apply for assistance in fall too? And I assume that means assistance from our office.
Yeah, so we have programs throughout the year. So we always have all of our events listed on Handshake, so you can always check out to see what's coming up. For current students, you can always use our resources. We're here year round. For alumni, so we have those individual career advising appointments up to a year after you graduate, just because, number of career advisors to number of students and alumni that we have. So if you have graduated a year ago now, you're still welcome to check out all of our online resources. You can still come to, our workshops and webinars. You're welcome to do that. So definitely we have plenty of information out there.
Well, Carrie, I want to thank you so much for the information that you shared today. And I want to thank everyone for joining us and participating as wonderfully as you all did. So thank you very much. And we'll look forward to seeing you at one of our upcoming events. So with that, have a wonderful day. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.